Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Namo MyoHoRenGeKyo. I'm so happy you could join me today. You hear me talk often about the Lotus Sutra, the MyoHoRenGeKyo being the correct teaching for this time and our capacity, this latter age of the law. Today we're going to start a Gosho called The Teaching That Accords with the Buddha's Mind. And since, our entire practice is based on awakening our Buddha mind, Nichiren is going to go into, again, the history of Buddhist teachings, Shakyamuni's divisions, and the teaching that accords with the Buddha's mind. It could have been a longer title to say, for this period of the latter day of the law, for those of us living in modern times, this is the teaching that accords with the Buddha's mind. In other words, the teaching that is the method of awakening the Buddha's mind in us, in each of us. It's already there. We just need to awaken it, right? Or accord with it. Which teaching rings consonant with the Buddha mind, right? All right. So enough about the title. This was written late in Minobu, 1279, I believe. And Nichiren wrote this to one of his followers, one of his students who had lost a son. A lot of death in a lot of these letters. Well, they're communicating with their senior teacher, right, the Bodhisattva. So it's always going to be reporting on the age, and as we know, there are famines, there are warring clans, there's the upheaval, there's invasions from the Mongols, there's earthquakes, there's all sorts of stuff happening in the 13th century Japan. And it's a shogunate, samurai-run government, professional assassins. So, there's going to be a lot of death. So, all the more reason to contact Nichiren and ask for his support, his advice, what to do. And this is one of those letters, and Nichiren takes the opportunity to nail down, once again, the superiority, the ultimate, the culminating, the raison d'etre of Buddhist teachings, the whole purpose of Shakyamuni's advent in the world to teach this method so that we can attain our Buddha mind. You have kindly sent me 3 koku of rice. I immediately placed it as an offering before the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law, the single vehicle, and chanted Namo MyoHoRenGeKyo just once. I have done this so that your beloved son may assuredly and without doubt, which is a quote from the sutra, be escorted to the Pure Land of Eagle Peak. Now, he references this Pure Land of Eagle Peak many, many times, and just in case I haven't harped on it enough throughout, some of these sentences will go right by in translation, but conceptually you need to understand that the Pure Land of Eagle Peak is the description of the ceremony in the sky. It's often called the Lotus Sutra, the sermon of the Lotus Sutra itself, right? That whole sermon takes place in a mental exercise of collections of different types of minds, minds in different states of conditions and tendencies, some accomplished, some not so accomplished, some ignorant, some very educated, right? From Devadatta on down to the Dragon King's daughter. We have every scope of human thinking in the story of, in the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law. And so, because it is that story that is titled MyoHoRenGeKyo, in which each chapter is titled MyoHoRenGeKyo, the entirety of that teaching being MyoHoRenGeKyo is that there goes the nose again. This is going to be a habit now. I hope not. This entire sermon is about instantiating and maintaining and the benefits of, the rewards of, the accomplishment of, the instantiation immediately, the invocation of Buddha mind. And so Eagle Peak is a reference to the teaching of attaining the Buddha mind. And this Pure Land is it's an English reference, but still it's a reference of place. It's a samsaric instantiation of a non-samsaric mind, Buddha mind. So we still use earthly words because we don't know the words of awakening. We only know how to instantiate the awakening through MyoHoRenGeKyo, which is our transition from samsaric existence and attachment to a liberation from that. Without leaving it, without denying our bodies, we can, in a detached mind, observe with clarity what this whole life thing provides, is about, obviates. It lets us see pretty clearly how karma works, what karma is, works against life and should be eschewed, modified, unattached, influenced in a positive manner, so that all energies go toward this amazing, precious process called life, without the hindrances of those negative influences that are non-life affirming. Because life's pretty darn cool. Because only through this life process are we able to realize the immensity of it. Without it, without samsara, there is no Buddhahood. There's just quietude. So if you're going to be here in samsara, experiencing the quietude while in samsara, pretty awesome. You don't get jostled about. Picture going down a rapids in the kayaks. You ever seen that in the Olympics or anywhere else? It tossles you about quite a lot. In fact, one of the first skills you have to learn in a kayak is how to roll over, because you're going to end up with your head in the water and you could hit a rock. So you need to be able to correct yourself pretty quick. Well, that's like life. Now picture your mind being a drone, calmly sailing above, if it's possible to have a quiet drone, sailing above, watching you go through the rapids. If you weren't going through the rapids, you couldn't watch it. If you couldn't watch it, you wouldn't understand the difference. And objectively watching it is quite thrilling. Not in the same way as being in it, but as observing the amazing, precious activity of it. It's a poor analogy, but it's an analogy nonetheless, right? So when he talks about the Pure Land of Eagle Peak, he's talking about that experience, that mental experience of liberation, of MyoHoRenGeKyo, of the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law, the sermon of the Lotus Sutra, right? The nature of cause and effect is like the relationship of flower to fruit, or it is like the case of a single flame no bigger than the light of a firefly, which, when applied to 1,000 ri plain of dried grass, in the space of an instant burns first one blade of grass, then 2, then 10, then 100, 1,000, and 10,000, so that the grass and trees over an area of 10 or 20 cho are consumed all at once. So he's talking about the realization of our Buddha mind is like a vast domino. You know, when you see not just a line of dominoes, but when that one goes down and that line hits 10 lines, 100 lines, 1,000 lines, that awakening just expands and expands, right? A dragon who places one small drop of water in its claws and ascends to the heavens can cause rain to fall upon the major world system. Again, this is part of the old Asian folklore, right? But an analogy again. So not all of his analogies are perfect, kind of like mine. When performed as an offering to the Lotus Sutra, even a small act of goodness produces rewards that are equal in magnitude to these. So there you have it. You know, sometimes we worry about, man, this is all I've got, but if it'll help you here. That's worthy of all of the help that you could give that would be limitless. It's because of the cause, because of the attitude, because of the intent. When you hear or read the word cause, think attitude and intent. What is your attitude and intent? That's what Buddhism's all about. That's why this cause and effect things. Don't think about it dry like scientific cause and effect. Think about it mentally. Buddhism is mind. Think about it as your attitude and your intent and how you maintain it throughout your thought of doing whatever and your thought after doing whatever. Think about that. Because sometimes when we're in the moment, we do a good thing, and the minute we do it, we counteract it in our minds. Like, yeah, I shouldn't have wasted my time. I shouldn't have done that. You see how you've wiped out your reward from that? You did it to yourself. Attitude and intent. Maintaining. That's why we chant over and over. Maintaining the attitude and intent of enlightenment. Not an easy thing to do while we're mired in samsara. And yet, only our ability to do it is only here in samsara. It's a conundrum, huh? 100 years after the passing of the Buddha, there was a ruler in India known as Ashoka the Great, who reigned over 1/4 of the 84,000 states that make up the continent of Jambudvipa. 84,000. It's a repeated number in many, many analogies, isn't it? He was attended by the dragon kings and summoned the demons to serve him, and with 60,000 arhats as his teachers, he vowed to erect 84,000 stone stupas and make offerings of 100,000 million gold pieces to the Buddha. Such was the stature of this great ruler. But if we inquire as to what meritorious deeds from the past existences allowed him to achieve such greatness, we find that he had done no more than offer a single mud pie to Shakyamuni Buddha. So from humble beginnings, right? Shakyamuni Buddha had an uncle named King Dronodana. And this king's son was known as Aniruddha. This prince was born with a bowl in his hand, and the bowl had rice in it. When the rice was eaten, more rice appeared in the bowl and kept on appearing, so that there was never a time when the bowl was empty of rice. As a result, when he was a child, the prince was given the name At Will. And through the power of the Lotus Sutra, he became a Buddha known as the Thus Come One Universal Brightness. If we inquire what cause from a previous existence brought all this about, we find that it was because at a time of famine, he offered a meal of millet to a monk who was a Pratyeka Buddha. Now, there's a lot of complexity to all this, and we could sit and take every word apart. But I'm relying a little bit on your curiosity, that if any of this piques a curiosity at you, maybe you read some of it and you go, what? Or you read something and you go, oh, I get that. But how does that connect to that? Whatever your curiosity, let it lead your study. That's how study becomes fun and nurturing and inspiring. That's where your insights will come. Oh, I get that now. Oh, that's not at all what I thought. That's what raises your confidence in understanding what you're doing here. And as much as your confidence increases, so does your resolve. And as your resolve increases, so much does your depth of experience of Buddha mind when you invoke it. If you don't understand Buddha mind, you'll chant and you'll feel good, you'll feel different, and you can write that off to just the breathing and the rhythm and doing it with other people. Anything you do, go to a concert and see how riled up people get just from being next to one another with the same attitude, intent, right? So that's nothing new. Buddhism isn't unique in that respect. But as we study and we understand how the mind works, how our minds work, how we can change our actual experience of everyday life through attaining this wonderful detached mind. The more we understand how that works, the more awed we are by it, the more we're inspired to continue doing it, right? The more when we run into difficulties, we go, man, I've got to get to my Butsudan. Right? It's just like when you get a cut and you know you need a Band-Aid. He offered millet, a humble offering, to a Pratyeka Buddha. What's a Pratyeka Buddha? A person of learning and realization, a person on the cusp of becoming a full-fledged Buddha, or Bodhisattva, an early stage of Bodhisattva, if you will. Somebody who's so learned about the nature of Buddha that now their practice is very lofty. They're able to attain this really strong position of non-attachment. When you offer to someone like that, how close are you or how far away are you from the enlightenment itself? You see, at that point, you're no longer offering something to a human being. You're offering something to a human being of causation. Of causation, what causation? Buddhahood. Right? You can call it 6 degrees of separation, 2 degrees, 1 degree. The closer you are to something, the more you experience it, the more noble or of value or rewarding is your support of it. Just like I've talked many times about these offerings to Nichiren. He immediately turns them over to the Lotus Sutra. He is the envoy, the votary of this method of enlightenment. If one can gain benefits such as these, even from making an offering to a Pratyeka Buddha, then the benefits gained by giving alms to the votary of the Lotus Sutra are infinitely greater, because he is in fact a bodhisattva. You are 1 degree of separation now from enlightenment. You see? Exceeding even those gained by making offerings to countless Buddhas. Because when you make offerings at your mandala, at your Butsudan, you are making offerings to your Buddha. This is why he says countless Buddhas. Right? So you make offerings at your altar all the time to your Buddha and Buddha-ness in general. But when you make an offering to the votary of the Lotus Sutra, you're making offerings to somebody, I hate to, it's like a celebrity. It's a term of today. It's not a very good one, but this is somebody, what I mean to say is somebody with a very huge reach, influence. Think about the president of a country. right? The millions of people hang on his or her every word. If you make an offering to that person, what you're making an offering to is their influence. Millions of minds, millions of Buddhas. That's why it's more significant. But don't discount your offerings to your own Buddha. It's necessary. And if you have the attitude and intent that is equal to that, right? Your separation is one. Nichiren is an inhabitant of the country of Japan within the 7,000 Yohana area that constitutes the southern continent of Jambudvipa. There are 84,000 states. Among these, there are 16 great states, 500 middle-sized states, 10,000 small states, and countless smaller states scattered about like grains of millet. India is a major country, comprising 5 regions. In the midst of the ocean to the east of it, there is a little island, which is the country of Japan. Japan is situated over 100,000 ri to the east of the central region of India. During the 1,000 years following the passing of the Buddha, known as the former day of the law, Buddhism remained within the confines of India and was not transmitted to other countries. But after the 1,000 years of the former day of the law had ended, and the world was 15 years into the middle day of the law, Buddhism was transmitted to the land of China. 300 years after it was introduced to China, it was transmitted to the Korean kingdom of Pachke. And after it had been in Pachke for 100 years, and 1,415 years had elapsed since the passing of the Buddha, a bronze gilt statue of Shakyamuni Buddha and copies of various scriptures were for the first time introduced to Japan in the reign of the 13th human sovereign, Emperor Kimei. Since that time, over 700 years have passed. The great collection of scriptures that has reached Japan during this period has increased to more than 5,000 or 7,000 volumes, and the number of schools has grown to 8, 9, and then 10. In the country of Japan, there are 66 provinces and 2 islands, over 3,000 shrines dedicated to deities, and over 10,000 Buddhist temples. Half the men and women of the country are monks and nuns. Half. And the Buddhist teachings flourish here in a manner that surpasses that of China and India. But within the world of Buddhist teachings, various controversies have arisen. The adherents of the Pure Land School look upon Amida Buddha as their object of devotion, and the adherents of the True Word School worship the Thus Come One Mahavajrana, while the people of the Zen School, ignoring both sutras and Buddhas, take Bodhidharma as their object of devotion. Bodhidharma was the Indian monk who was hired by a great landowner who was trying to save the temple, the Shaolin temple. The monks were weak, thin, hungry. Marauders would come in and steal their food stores, and they would starve. They could barely meditate or practice any kind of practices, reading, education, any of it. They weren't yet exposed to Kung Fu. That didn't exist. They were just meditators and monks living in seclusion. Bodhidharma, after living there almost 10 years, came up with an exercise to strengthen the monks, not only so that they could protect their food stores, but also so that we're healthy enough, that their body and mind were in a healthy enough, stable enough situation that they could meditate well. And you know the story. This exercise of strengthening tendons and sinew, as it was known, a great classic, the strengthening of the tendons and sinews. Title is pretty much that. I am not quoting it directly. That later becomes Tai Chi Chuan, moving with the mind, the bioelectric force through the body to manifest into Jin, power. Chuan being fist as a ideogram. Tai Chi Chuan becomes a form of daily practice, exercise, perfecting the body, perfecting the mind's connection with the body, moving energy sources through the meridians of the body to help it heal, to strengthen it, and to deliver a defense, either graciously or violently. And then the story goes on. The martial arts grow out of this, right? So Bodhidharma, this great monk who came to teach Buddhism to the Shaolin Temple, that was at the time Taoist, there were a lot of Taoist concepts that fit very neatly into Buddhism. So it caught on quickly. But Buddhism extended that to the mind-body connection. And the Shaolin then became quite well known, right? We've seen thousands of movies about the Shaolin. So they take that monk as their leader, as their teacher, as their object is not a good word. We see that object of devotion, even object of worship, which we don't do. We don't worship. But object, really, we need to see that word as a verb. We need to come up with a different word. Because what's intended in that translation is an objective, a movement toward, an accomplishment of. Right? What we want are the three bodies: manifest, dharma, reward. Reward of a body of manifest dharma. Right? Those three bodies is what we're moving ourselves toward. So it's not a devotion. It's a resolve, right? It's a determined, single-minded will. Tai Chi, our will, to move our life force to enliven and enlighten our mental force. You might say is spiritual, but spiritual has a bunch of other charisma attached to it, right? As for the adherents of the other schools, they for the most part are influenced by and follow the Nimbutsu proponents and the true word advocates, and though they do not necessarily regard either of these schools as superior, they are swayed by the more powerful and influenced by the larger of the two, and hence take Amida Buddha as their principal objective of devotion. And that objective is very, when you take it apart, in light of the Lotus Sutra, it makes no sense. Amida is a conjecture of Shakyamuni. He's not an actual person. He's a type of enlightenment that resides in a type of place. But that's all samsaric rhetoric. So they chant the Amida Buddha's name over and over again. Look, we're practicing MyoHoRenGeKyo, and we're not chanting Shakyamuni's name over and over again, because that's an earthly thing. That's what we're trying to detach from. And here, Amida Buddha isn't even that. He's an imagined state, which is very attractive to people like magical thinking. It's mystical. It must be great. MyoHoRenGeKyo is very pragmatic. It's very about your attitude and intent, the way you live your life. That's where the greatest fulfillment is to be experienced. Rejecting Shakyamuni Buddha, who is the sovereign, the teacher, the parent of our present world, right? That's what we're practicing, his enlightenment, Buddhism. Why would you go follow an example, a thought experiment? Yeah, use it, that's great, but that's not your final, that's not the destination. That's just help toward the destination, right? They pray to escape to another world. See, that's the problem. That is located 100,000 million worlds away and that belongs to Amida Buddha, a complete stranger. This Amida Buddha is neither our parent, nor our sovereign, nor our teacher, but merely a figure who, in a certain sutra, made 48 false vows. And yet foolish persons, believing these vows to be true, madly clang out a rhythm on bells and dance and leap about, reciting the name of Amida Buddha. But though they abandon the world of their parent in disgust, the messengers whom Amida Buddha has promised to send to welcome them do not appear. And they lose their way in the sky, while in an intermediate state between death and rebirth, the karma that comes from slandering the law pulls them downward, plunging them into the prison of the three evil negative influence paths, where the fearful demons, wardens of hell, pounce upon them with delight, binding them attachment, and subjecting them to endless torments. That is the best description I've read yet to date on comparing MyoHoRenGeKyo to the Nembutsu, Amida Buddha practice. And it's interesting, I've never heard or read this before, the way he takes apart remember I talk about birth, death, moment to moment, instantiation, decay, and falling away leads to another instantiation, falling away, instantiation, birth, death, birth, existence, death, birth, existence, death. You can put steps in there if you want, but it's moment to moment, right? But he takes it apart and he says, the karma that comes from slandering the law let me go back a little further. Amida Buddha has promised to send, and they lose their way, the intermediate between the birth and the death and the rebirth and the death and the rebirth, and there's like a sine wave. There's an in-between there. And that's where influences from outside and from within, attitude and intent, manifest life affirming or life unaffirming, and they imprint on the next rebirth, and that's how we modify our kinetic energy, our movement, our momentum. So it's very smart of Nichiren to kind of dissect that, even that moment, from its beginnings to its next palpitation. I don't know, how would you say it? So they lose their way in the sky while in an intermediate state between death and rebirth. There it is. The karma that comes from slandering the law, that highly negative commitment to something that's not correct and leading you away from the correct, that's even more important, pulls them downward. Their life condition goes south, goes down, plunging them into the prison of the three evil paths. What are the three evil paths? Hell, hunger, and animality. Those are very life unaffirming, they're hells of experience, suffering, very base sufferings of samsara, where the fearful demons, wardens of hell, pounce upon them with delight, binding them, attachment, and subjecting them to endless torments, the sufferings of those attachments. You see, if you know how to read this, it's the same teaching over and over again. When based on the sutras, I speak in general terms of such matters, only I, of all of the 4,994,828 men and women in Japan, I don't know if you had that accurate of a census, but it's pretty impressive, am thought strange, and the other 4,994,827 persons all regard me as their enemy. He's overstating it a bit, but that's the position of the shogunate, isn't it? Strangely enough, they do not follow Shakyamuni, who is their sovereign, teacher, and parent. What is more, they curse and strike me, drive me away, and by resorting to slander, cause me to be sentenced to exile or execution. It is the way of the world that the poor fawn upon the rich, and the lowly revere the noble, and the few follow the many. So even those persons who changed or chanced to put their resolute mind in the Lotus Sutra are intimidated by society and fear others, and many of them fall into hell. This is most pitiful. People succumb to social pressures. Even though Nichiren has taught them well, demonstrated the Lotus Sutra, the MyoHoRenGeKyo, it actually makes them more fearful because now they know better than to chant Amida Buddha. But when their friends comes around, Amida Buddha, Amida Buddha, Amida Butsu, right? They're just, I have an old saying I used to say, but it's not very pretty. People have a way of defiling their own pedestal. I'll say it that way. We all put ourselves on some sort of a pedestal. That's what makes us think we're unique. We're individual, self, ego. That doesn't mean you're a jock. Even the person with the most desperate life still has an ego. And still, by causation, mouth, deed, thought, we somehow defile what little pedestal we may have with avarice, anger, manipulation, greed, or just plain stupidity, just foolishness. How many people, it's a common term we've heard for years now, this, what's it called, willful ignorance. It's mind-boggling to think that we could put those words together and know what it means to be willfully ignorant. I don't want to know, which means you already know better, but you don't want to know. You desire to be stupid, be ignorant. I don't want to know. I don't want the facts. I don't believe in truths anymore. I just believe in what I want to believe, whatever's comfortable. How do we live in a time when that's such a huge aspect of our society? It boggles the mind. Well, I'll go a little further. Let's see where Nichiren goes with this. But perhaps because of Nichiren's ignorant outlook or some past karma, when I read the statements that, quote, the lotus is the foremost, end quote, from Shakyamuni's own sermons, right, and commentaries on them, and that among the sutras I have preached, now preach, and will preach, this Lotus Sutra is the most difficult to believe and the most difficult to understand, end quote, and that, quote, I am the only person who can rescue and protect others, end quote. I take them to be the golden words of the Thus Come One himself. They are not my words at all. So again, I remind you, we don't practice Nichiren Buddhism. We practice Bodhisattva Nichiren's guidance and scholarship and doctrine of the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni's golden words, Shakyamuni's description and methodology for achieving the enlightenment he himself achieved. Buddhahood, something all of us innately are from, in, and can instantiate while in this condition and the tendencies we have in samsara. Samsara isn't a place. It's like a point. It's a state of mind. A point has no physical placement, location. A point is a direction, a location without a place. The people of today, however, believe that the pronouncement of their own teachers are the golden words of the Thus Come One. Thus, they place such pronouncements on the same level as the Lotus Sutra. It's interesting to say this. Considering the two to be of equal authority, or they regard these teachings as superior to the Lotus Sutra, or they reason that through their teachers' pronouncements are inferior, or though their teachers' pronouncements are inferior, they are well suited to the capacity of the people. That happens a lot in everything, doesn't it? Not just Buddhism. We have a brilliant constitution in the United States of America. And yet, when a president stands up there and says all kinds of things in a fiery way that are completely counter to that wonderful document, everyone forgets about the document. And they all fawn over this great leader who has a microphone that reaches millions of people and can say whatever the hell he pleases or she pleases. That's what Nichiren's talking about here. We all have to become scholars of our own Buddha. There is only one historical Buddha, and there is only one Buddha, yours. We all share in the same potential enlightenment, and that potential is completely egalitarian, but we all have our distinct paths to awaken, to penetrate it. No one can tell us what our Buddha is. No one can give it to us, take it from us. It's yours. Make it so. One should and this last part, even if you know your teacher's flawed, you tell yourself, well, that's what we deserve. We're pretty stupid. And that's what we need in order to move forward. What a strange kind of thinking that is. If you accept the Buddhist paradigm that we all have innate Buddha, how can you say that what we deserve is, our lowly lives here in the lower paths as in samsara, that's all we deserve? What? Are you a Buddhist or not? The reason you're a Buddhist is to instantiate Buddha, not something middle ground. Well, that's good enough. How lamentable is that? One should understand that of the sacred teachings of the Thus Come One, there are those that are preached, quote, in accordance with the minds of others, end quote, and those that are preached, quote, in accordance with the mind of the Thus Come One. Thus, when a parent yields to the will of his or her child, how often do we see that? The child becomes the parent. That is a case of the former. But when the child complies with the will of the parent, and the parent is in control, that is the latter. All the other sutras are examples of preaching in the accordance with the minds of others. Because, when expounding them, the Buddha adjusted himself to the minds of all other living beings. This is expedient means. He's trying to reach the people in their tendencies, in their conditions, and raise them up. So he speaks in their understanding, their realm of knowing, and leads them toward higher mind states. But the Lotus Sutra is an example of preaching in accordance with the Buddha's own mind. Okay, now all of you are ready to understand what I mean by becoming Buddha. This is how you become Buddha. This is how you enliven your Buddha mind. This is me telling you how you get this, how you do what I did. That's not the minds of others. That's the mind of Buddha. MyoHoRenGeKyo. Because in it, the Buddha had all living beings comply with his own mind. The ceremony in the sky, Eagle Peak, however you want to envelop your mind around it. The Lotus Sutra is a story of how Shakyamuni Siddhartha became enlightened. the method he used, the method that anyone, no matter what their status, can use to enliven instantly their own Buddha mind. I think that's a good stopping point. Kind of went through a whole exploration of a point in this part. I like that when that happens. We'll continue that. This is a good one, isn't it? Namo MyoHoRenGeKyo. Thank you for being here. I so much appreciate you. I'm also awed by your determination. And remember, you can download all these videos as audio files, as a podcast, the Buddhahood podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. If you can't find it, let me know. If there's anything I can do to make sure that the provider that you use, the usual suspects like Spotify and Apple and Google, and or you can just go to the Podbean.com podcast site. That's where the home of my podcast. But if you know anything about podcasts, you create a home and then you create connections to all of the other services that provide the podcast. So it's available all over the place. There are probably some small niche companies out there that I haven't applied for or put it on. And if that's the case, in your country, you may have a more popular option to Spotify or Apple or even Podbean, and you would like to see my podcast there, send me a link so that I'll know how to get there, and so I'll put my podcast on there for you, okay? In the meantime, use your mandala, chant Namo MyoHoRenGeKyo. Let me know if you need a Gohanzan or a mandala of Gohanzan. If you need a book of, I've been sending out a PDF. It's available on my bookstore to get a liturgy that has all 3 sections and descriptions and instructions on chanting and all. But not all of us can afford a couple bucks or a few bucks to order things, and it may be a difficulty. I don't want that to stop you from practicing. So if that's the case, email me. I'll send you a PDF that you can read online or print out, or have a friend print out for you, so that you can do Gongyo correctly, meditations correctly, and let's just get our practice to the next level. Namo MyoHoRenGeKyo. See you next time.